Namaste, everyone. Welcome to our two-day conference. My name is Nikunj Trivedi, and I'm the president of the Coalition of Hindus of North America, which is a grassroots-level Hindu organization dedicated to improving the understanding of Hinduism in North America. Um, if you are interested in joining us, please go to www.kona.org and get involved. We would love to have you as part of our teams, as well as some very exciting projects and initiatives that we're working on. Today's conference is going to be a very interesting conversation with some eminent personalities. We have scheduled it for 2 days because we're all in this COVID-19 situation, and as a result of which, we're not able to do a physical conference right now. But this also gives us an opportunity to invite people from all over the world to join us in this important conversation. So today's 2-day virtual conference will feature experts on the historic and contemporary dynamics around the genocide of Kashmiri Hindu Pandits, imposition and nullification of Article 370 and 35A and its impact, Islamic terrorism and democracy, restoration of human rights for marginalized communities, and what the future holds for the now bifurcated territory. The conference will also explore the importance of understanding and documenting transgenerational trauma and stories of genocide so that future generations appreciate the struggle for basic rights of religious freedom and dignity. Prior to the nullification of Article 370 and 35A, approximately 500 Dalit Valmiki Hindus, their families, 11,000 Gorkhas, and 150,000 refugees from the 1947 partition era were treated as second-class citizens in the Indian state of Jammu and Kashmir. They were not allowed to vote in state assembly elections, had no land or property ownership rights, and were kept away from state employment and other benefits. Women in the state could not buy real estate and transfer property to children if they married non-Kashmiris. People of Ladakh also felt marginalized due to Article 370 and 35A. Apart from these, over 35 other federal laws, including the Child Marriage Act, were not applicable in the state of Jammu and Kashmir because of the enactment of Article 370 and 35A. Overall, a population of 300,000 was excluded from social welfare schemes, scholarships, and many other opportunities due to the presence of Article 370 and 35A. We have also seen intense propaganda against the Kashmiri Hindu Pandit community for speaking out about their genocide and trauma that they have faced over the years. We'll be discussing that today as well. In spite of false propaganda around this important development by vested interest, these and other communities have welcomed restoration of their human rights as well as a more democratic social order. So we'll be talking to experts today about some of these conversations and ensure that the dominant narrative around these topics is challenged and questioned today. So starting off, we have a very important guest with us who's going to be our keynote speaker, Shri Vivek Agnihotri. Vivek ji doesn't need any introductions, but it's important for us to also talk about some of the work he has been doing. So Vivek Agnihotri is an award-winning filmmaker, author, and a public intellectual. As ex-advertising man, Vivek is a very popular public speaker on social, political, and issues and lectures on creative thinking and innovation in top global institutes. His film, Buddha in a Traffic Jam, dealt with the theme of urban Naxalism and exposed the sinister nexus of radical leftists between Naxals, media, NGOs, and the academia. The film faced extreme resistance from the radical left and was stuck for 5 years before he traveled all across India to show his film, encountering a violent attempt to curb his freedom of speech. His latest film, The Tashkent File, based on the mysterious death of India's second Prime Minister, Sri Lal Bahadur Shastri, during the Cold War, went on to become the biggest super hit of the recent times, running over 100 days at the box office, and is now a case study in India's top management institutes. He's currently making an epic film, The Kashmir Files, which I'm sure he'll touch base on, which is on the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus in 1990. Vivek has traveled across the globe to record the testimonials of first-generation victims of this genocide. His debut book, Urban Naxals, broke all records and became the fastest-selling bestseller. Today, the term urban Naxals is used as a legit term and is being accepted as a political reality by analysts, media, and the government of India. His next book, Who Killed Shastri, is actually due to release in August of 2020. Vivek is a passionate public speaker on Indian civilization, besides a variety of issues, and has spoken on some of the best platforms, including TED, Harvard University Conclave, Niti Aayog, Ideas, India Conclave, World Hindu Congress, Indo-US Chamber of Commerce, and many top universities, including Purdue, Ohio State, Oxford, Columbia, and the IITs and IIMs in India. He has served as a chairman of the international jury of IFFI and on the jury of the National Film Awards. He has served as Secretary of Indian Film Directors Association and is currently serving as the Director of CBSC Board. He runs a school of creativity to help youth discover their creative consciousness for success. He has also been running a popular TV channel called VRA TV. He has won several national and international awards and is married to national award-winning actress Pallavi Joshi ji and has 2 children. He is an avid traveler, columnist, and a social media influencer. So Vivek ji, welcome. Very nice to have you. So glad you joined us today on this important conference. We will begin with you. Want to give you the opportunity to talk about your recent movie as well as some of the points that you think that are important. So go ahead, please.
Thank you, Nikunji. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kohana, the Hindu Association of North America, and all my Kashmiri brothers and sisters, whoever are listening. Thank you, Nikunji. Last time when I met you, if you remember, Kashmir was in the center. We were supposed to do a lecture at Rutgers, but some people who hate India and Hindu cause and the Kashmiri cause opposed it, and we had to shift it to a temple close by in New Jersey. I remember I drove all the way from Washington, D.C. to be there on time, but somehow it was not possible to do at Rutgers, and we shifted it to a nearby temple, which was jam-packed. It was full with all wonderful people. And I remember after I delivered my speech, which was over an hour or so, there were some very enlightening questions, some very sensitive questions. People were concerned about the Kashmiri genocide, and I threw a lot of light on Kashmiri culture and civilization and why it's very important for us to integrate Kashmir. You'll be surprised to know that almost at the end of the show, some 2-3 boys who claim to be Kashmiri boys, but when I asked them what's their name, where do they come from exactly, it turned out that they were either misguided Kashmiri boys or they most probably came from Pakistani side of Kashmir. And very rarely in such a brief time, I have seen so much of hatred and ideological violence. Now, they're young boys. Young boys have no reason to be so hateful, so violent, and because their stakes are not so high. And I left from there when I was driving back to New York. In that long 1.5 hour long journey, the only thought which lingered in my mind was, why Kashmir issue is so misunderstood when it's the easiest issue to understand. And I'm also part of that. Before I went on this journey to make this film on Kashmir called The Kashmir Files, I also had misunderstood this problem. Even I didn't know the gravity of this problem. I thought, yes, there were problems, there were conflicts, there was terrorism, and because of that, our Kashmiri brothers and sisters had to leave and there was mass exodus. It's only when I went on this journey to chase the truth and discover what was the real truth behind this. And I met the first generation victims in US, in UK, in Jammu, in Kashmir, in Pune, in Bangalore, in Mumbai, in Delhi, and wherever they are. When I started listening to their stories, you won't believe me, for 6 months my eyes were swollen and my heart was broken. I've never felt so much of pity, so much of despair, so much of pain ever in my life. I hope Ma Saraswati gives me the strength to bring out even 10% of that pain, the 10% of that suffering on celluloid on the screen when I make this film, I think I will be blessed, and that will be the biggest ever achievement of mine. I'll try. I promise you, I'll try my best with utmost sincerity, with full honesty, without even manipulating one fact. As I heard, I'll show it. But the point I want to make here is, why is it that I didn't know about it? The reason is that not even once I was told that in Kashmir a big civilizational war is going on. Not even once I was told or taught or informed by the media, politicians, schools, education, history books, or intellectuals, or the so-called human rights NGOs, that while rest of the India started enjoying the fruits of development and democracy and freedom, the partition continued in Kashmir. It never ended. And the population of Hindus kept diminishing over a period of time. Yes, there were lots of Kashmiri Hindus were living there before 1990, but life was hell. Life was hell because very often you will find that 18 crore people who live here in the rest of India are called minority, whereas only 2% Hindus who were living in Kashmir were never treated like minorities. They never enjoyed the kind of rights minority enjoys in the rest of India. There are no human rights. You'll be surprised to know in ordinary cricket matches, whenever India won, these young Hindu boys were beaten up by Muslim boys. If India lost, they celebrated it. It is easier for a person to live, like they say, without money, easy to live without resources, but it's very difficult to live without dignity, without equality, without freedom, without human rights, and all these things were taken away. People, sometimes what happens is you do not realize. But once your dignity is taken away, once your rights are taken away, you get into a submissive mode. And that's when oppression and exploitation begins. So let's look at what level the rights were taken and the oppression began. It happened at multiple levels. Number one, let's take the intellectual level. Intellectual, I say socio-political, historical. The entire history was distorted. The history which we take pride in, because whatever we are today is because of our history, our heritage, and that gives us the reference and the context to move forward in life. Kashmir became an Islamic state. A state of Shiva, a state of Saraswati, became state of Islamic terror. Right from Araki's time, Hamdani's time, to Farooq Abdullah and Omar Abdullah's time and Mufti's time. You will be surprised to know that even after partition, all these Sheikh Abdullahs and Farooq Abdullahs, they became two-faced snakes. One, when they would come to Delhi when they needed money and funds, they would sing songs in praise of India, secularism, unity, and how Kashmir was always there with India. And the moment they landed in Kashmir, they started psychologically oppressing our Hindu brothers and sisters. And they spoke about Kashmiri Muslim supremacy. All the laws, all the administrative policies were anti-Hindu. The social law and order structure was such that Hindus were discriminated. You'll be surprised to know that the culture slowly was destroyed. Slowly it became a state where only namaz was blaring on loudspeakers. All the radio channels were playing Islamic sermons, and Shiva and Saraswati, the great culture, art, and literature slowly started vanishing from the mainstream Kashmir. And in rest of India, the media and the intellectuals and the historians and politicians didn't even bother, as if it is somebody else's problem. You will be surprised to know that the generation in which I have grown, most of the times, the narrative in all these social circles was that let the Kashmir go to Pakistan. That was because people were misinformed. Nobody informed them. Nobody informed them about the greatness, the wisdom of Kashmiri Hindus, the greatness of Kashmiri culture, how Kashmir has led India on the intellectual front, on the cultural front, whatever we know about the art, literature, culture, we know about sciences, we know about music, actually was all from the holy land of Kashmir. But we don't know. And it is very difficult to geographically separate anybody unless and until you culturally separate them. And that's exactly what was done by Kashmir. And I have no hesitation in saying that every party was equally responsible for it. Only when Shama Prasad Mukherjee went there to fight for it, he died in mysterious circumstances. When I say party, I don't mean political party. I mean the stakeholders like all the muftis and the Abdullahs and the Gandhis and the media and the corrupt academic system of India. The corrupt, I say, because it does teach wrong history. Nobody in India, even today, nobody in India knows about the great history of Kashmir. Why not? And which is why I maintain that the first great step in integrating Kashmir back with India was the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. It not only gave rights to all our Valmiki brothers and sisters, not to LGBTQ community, not just to Dalits, not just to Gorkhas, but even to Kashmiri Hindus, which is their land, and they didn't have any human rights over there. Do you realize that no FIRs have been filed? Even whenever the massacres happened, 24 people were killed in Nadigram and places like that, there are no FIRs. Nobody is being punished. It's been 30 years. What can be worse than that in a modern, civilized, democratic, free society? Disintegrating somebody from their roots is the biggest crime one can commit on any society in the modern world. And that's what happened with Kashmiri Hindus. It has not happened with anybody. In the history of India, it has never happened. The only parallel you can think in the modern world is Holocaust. But after Holocaust happened, then the whole world came with compassion, resources, policies, political will, media, literature, art, movies. Everybody came to compensate for it with compassion, empathy, understanding, and uniting them back with the mainstream. But even after 30 years, even after abrogation of 370, you will find we have failed to do that. Who's responsible for this? I'll tell you. Number one, this global compassion and global liberal attitude towards Islamic terrorism. If anybody tries to say anything, the modern politically correct and vested interests start calling it Islamophobic, and therefore you're not allowed to even utter a word. It happened with me in Rutgers. It happened with me at Purdue. It happened with me in UK. Wherever I go, there is resistance and they say it's Islamophobic. You can't talk about 1990s Islamic terrorism. So this entire attitude of the so-called liberals and intellectuals towards this is stopping us to bring the narrative and the pain and suffering of Kashmiri Hindus into the global narrative. And that is like doing injustice to them. So I hold them guilty of doing this. Number two, the radical leftists. Radical leftists have created a sort of an understanding or alignment with Islamic terrorism and they are somehow resisting the Kashmir genocide story to come into mainstream. And I have faced it myself. Before me, if you see Kashmiri Hindus used to do, Kashmiri Pandits used to do, it was their narrative. But besides them, nobody in public life, nobody with any influence and impact in public life was using the word genocide. Everybody used to say exodus. Everybody used to say Kashmiri Hindus are homeless in their own land. But when I heard this story one-on-one with people, I said this is genocide. And not calling it genocide is again a crime, a human crime. And in every speech, every column, every writing, every single place, I started amplifying this genocide. And the moment I started amplifying it as a genocide, because it is a genocide, in fact, United Nations has also considered it as genocide. I'm not getting the technicality of it. Then I realized, I observed that the leftist people, whom I call urban naxals, they started attacking me, assaulting me, and lynching me. And they started doing my character assassination. They came to vandalize my Wikipedia page. They came to physically assault me with rods and all in one of the universities recently. They have been running campaigns against me. So these leftists, you have to understand, are also against calling it genocide. And the third party, which is very illogically, I mean, it's very difficult to comprehend why, which is the enemy. I call the word enemy because now we live in a world where sometimes you have to use these binary terms. The enemy of Kashmiri cause, the enemies of Kashmiri Hindus are the intellectuals and media and academicians and NGOs, this nexus, which I call urban nexus. This nexus of professors, research scholars, media, and NGOs. And how I realized this, I generally read a lot, but I don't form opinions and I don't comment unless and until it is understood by me completely or experienced by me. And whatever I speak only from my shared experience. So recently, last winter, when Shaheen Bagh happened in India, in Delhi, in the capital of India, which was and organized, well organized, funded by Islamic terrorists and leftist forces. Even the biryani packets, I have gone there, visited myself. I was the first person and perhaps the only person in, especially from the entertainment field or in creative field or a social influencer, who ran a very extremely aggressive campaign against it, to the extent that people started thinking that perhaps I'm insane. Why anybody without any stakes would run such a campaign? I'll tell you why. The reason is I realized the design was exactly the same as what happened in 1990 in Kashmir. Their whole objective was to create this mini Kashmirs, and as per my intelligence report, there are almost 50 to 60 mini Kashmirs still operating in India. Some is called Shaheen Bagh, some is called some other Bagh and some other Bagh in various cities. If Corona had not happened by this time, their whole idea was to erupt like this in 50, 60 mega cities of India, urban cities of India, and make the life of Hindus hell. And that's exactly what happened in Shaheen Bagh. I realized if this thing spreads, it will create a very big problem for India. And therefore, I went out resisting it. But when I was resisting, because they were involved in anti-India activities, tell me, if in sitting in this nation, if somebody speaks about anti-national, anti-India people, anti-India activities of foreign funding, of foreign enemies, trying to create anarchy in this country, why should the media be opposing it? Why should the intellectuals and NGOs be running a campaign against me? And they did all that. You can't imagine the kind of campaign they have run against me to destroy me, finish me, but they cannot, because I am blessed by Ma Saraswati, and I am saying this. I am here. I've just realized I'm here. There's a purpose of my life, and one of them is to take this story to its logical end, and therefore this film is helping me rediscover myself. And as I'm rediscovering myself, I'm rediscovering the great heritage of Kashmir, and through Kashmir, I am discovering the greatness of Bharat and the greatness of this civilization called Bharat. So for me, this is bigger than anything else, and therefore I jumped into fighting. And these people came after me. So Islamic terrorist people, which you have seen in US, how they came to oppose me. Then I saw the leftist people who are funded by Chinese money. And these intellectuals and so-called media, which is funded by parties like Indian National Congress of Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi. And these three collaborate and cooperate with each other to keep Kashmir isolated. Even now, the real story of Kashmir is not out. And therefore, in India, nobody uses the term genocide besides Kashmiri Hindus. And unless and until 130 crore people of India, 1.3 billion people of India are going to create a great narrative in social media, in public speaking, through books, through articles, through lectures, and say this is genocide, 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 like the Jews did it after the Holocaust. And that's why Holocaust has become a historical milestone, a global milestone, though it was a local problem. But from Japan to US, from Siberia to Africa, everywhere you go, Holocaust has become a symbol of human pain and suffering, of story of how human rights are being oppressed. But somehow the story of Kashmiri Hindus has never been able to forget global narrative, has never become a part of mainstream Indian narrative. Even in India, if party like BJP had not come, this wouldn't have been possible. Even now, when I go and when I need permissions to shoot my film, the topmost officers tell me, Sir, forget it now. Why are you getting it? You won't believe me. One of the topmost officers, the second in command in Kashmir, told me, Vivek ji, why are you making a film on genocide and all that? Please stop calling it genocide. Make a love story. It's time to, heal hearts. You cannot heal hearts unless and until people have realized, understood, and expressed the injustice which is being committed. Without realizing injustice, you want to just divert the attention. You don't want to talk about the injustice which is being done, and you want to talk about healing. That again is injustice. No FIRs are filed. Nobody is ever punished. Nobody is held guilty. All these politicians who were behind it, Abdullahs and Muftis, in creating this situation, taking it to this level, who let it happen in front of their eyes, are celebrated people. They made minted money. The terrorists became friends of Congress. They used to visit prime minister's residence, president's residence, and everywhere as if they were state guests. Where does it happen? This is inhuman. This is the violation of human rights. What is a human right after all? Yes, there is a constitutional right. Giving vote is your right. Being treated equal, getting jobs, fair play, all that is fine. But what about the psychological rights? What about the emotional rights? What about the right of my child to go back to his roots? What about the social dignity? Those are also human rights. Who's talking about it? Nobody is talking about it. Therefore, I decided that I will make this film and I will take this story to its logical conclusion so that for the generations to come, they know what kind of grave injustice has been done to this great community, the community which is symbol of wisdom, symbol of enlightenment, symbol of higher consciousness. But I have seen with my own eyes that this higher consciousness is being defeated in Kashmir by people of lower consciousness, the terrorists. Time has come, my friends, for all of us to do something about it. Constitutionally, Kashmir is integrated. Legally, it is integrated. Administratively, perhaps it's getting integrated. But now time has come to culturally, emotionally, intellectually, philosophically, to integrate it with the mainstream. And I'll tell you just a couple of things what you can do about it. Today we live in the world of information and ideas. It's a game, it's a war of narratives. Justice, equality, all these things are matter of narrative, the kind of narratives we create. I would appeal to everybody, whether you are a Kashmiri or not, especially if you are not a Kashmiri, and if you are a Kashmiri, of course, fill this universe with the great stories of Kashmir. Pledge to yourself, how will I pay back? My brothers and sisters lost their homes, they were derooted, unrooted. The entire history was wiped out. I am equally guilty for that, and it is my duty that I pay back and correct this and give them justice. How will I do it? I am not a judge, I am not High Court, I am not Prime Minister of India, I am not a politician. How do I do it? I am not even a social worker, I am not even an NGO, so what do I do? So I would suggest, take a note that every single night, at least for next 365 days, whatever social media platforms you are on, you write about the greatness of Kashmir. Pick up great stories of Kashmir. The power of positivity is so much. imagine hundreds of thousands of Indians writing great stories on all their social media platforms, be it Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you speak. If you write columns, write columns. If you write blogs, write blogs. If you are a photographer, take pictures and put it. If you are just a housewife and a good cook, cook lots of Kashmiri recipes, take the picture, write about it, and talk about the greatness. Whenever you meet a young Kashmiri boy or a girl who's doing good in life, pick up their, make their videos, put it, let it, fill it with so many stories, millions and millions of stories. Create a grand narrative around Kashmir so that the world takes a note of it. And they understand that we are going to take our revenge with our creativity, with our constructive idea, with our positive narrative. We are not going to play a victim card. We are going to play a winner card. And this will also attract many Vivek Agnihotris who want to do something but are scared to do it. They will also get courage to write songs, to create plays, to write books, to make movies, to conduct television shows, to make web series, and create a new consciousness. And the power of that consciousness would be that it will spread like the smell of saffron. And it will spread everywhere. And people will start joining. This is my vision, and this is my idea, and this is all I can do, and this is what I'm doing, and this is I shall do. Whatever happens, with all courage, honesty, sincerity, because this is my dharma to integrate the wisdom of Kashmir, the intellectual wealth of Kashmir, the greatness of Kashmir, the awakening of Kashmir, the enlightenment of Kashmir, the supra consciousness of Kashmir back to India, because unless and until this great consciousness is integrated with the mainstream consciousness of India, India can never become Vishwaguru. I owe it to my forefathers, I owe it to myself, I owe it to the future generations. This is my dharma. I have shared it with you, my vision, my reasoning. I hope, even if some of you follow what I am saying, next time when we will meet, things will have changed. Last time when I came to US, outside New Jersey airport, I had seen a big hoarding. There was a big billboard, huge billboard, which said Free Kashmir. Obviously, it was sponsored by Pakistan or perhaps the Islamic terrorist people. And that night when I drove and stopped at the Times Square, I called some of my Kashmiri friends, Mr. Vanchu, Mr. Surender Kaul. I shared with Mr. Rakesh Kaul also. And I said, I have one dream. All these billboards they have put up of Free Kashmir, I am living for a day when the Times Square will have a huge hoarding, will have a huge display about the genocide of Kashmiri Hindus, and people will look at it and feel guilty for ignoring it for so many years. I don't know when that dream is going to be actualized. If Mr. Vanchu, Mohan Vanchu ji is listening, if Surinder Kaul ji is listening, I want to remind them, to Mr. Rakesh Kaul, Swapna ji is going to join. I want to remind everybody that I am going to lead from the front to make that happen with all your support. But I am very glad that on the 5th of August, just few days back, at Times Square, the whole world saw the great Lord Rama. That is the beginning. It's a beginning of a new era. It's a beginning of a new awakening. It's a beginning of a new world where we are going to assert ourselves. We are going to determine that the next leg of the history will belong to us, to our Kashmiri young boys and girls. We must not live peacefully till the time we hand over the great land of Kashmir to the future generations of Kashmiris. On this note, I would like to thank again for inviting me, for being part of this great work with this Kona organization is doing. Thank you, Nikunji. Thank you, everybody. Namaskar and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Vivekji. That was wonderfully put, and really appreciate your sincerity and calling it out as it is. You rightly put out that the sincerity, the dedication, and everything that goes with it is needed to make sure the stories of Kashmiri Pandits are heard out there, that the stories of genocide are documented, not just in a very offensive way, but in a way that is through stories, through memoirs, and through so many different ways, creating new Vivek Agnihotris out there that can create this. So absolutely, really thank you very much for your time today. Namaskar. So as we move forward with the conference, I wanted to bring to attention that we talked about in Vivekji's talk about the documentation and importance of telling these stories. So our next panel is going to talk about exactly that, the importance of documenting, discussing, and reconciling transgenerational trauma and the stories of the oppressed. So today I have with me two esteemed guests. Let me just check the internet connection. Rajat Mitra ji, are you available and are you able to hear me?
Yes, I'm able to hear you.
Rajat ji, can you turn on your camera? Excellent. And Gokul ji, can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I'll do a brief introduction of the esteemed guests here. First, Rajat Mitra ji is a psychologist who has worked with the grief and trauma of people across many countries. He's a writer and a speaker on issues related to historical injustice and collective trauma. He has spoken in United Nations and also to universities, groups, and audiences across the world. He has worked as a psychologist with Islamists in Thailand, terrorists in Indian prisons, and also lectured to law enforcement and prison officials, human rights workers across Asia on a large number of issues. A social entrepreneur and an Ashoka Fellow from 2004, he received the United Nations Public Service Award in 2011 for his work on gender justice. While enrolled in a program for world leaders in Harvard's program for refugee trauma, Rajatji realized how art and literature can bring to light historical wrongs and transgenerational trauma, which made him write his novel, The Infidel Next Door, an exploration on healing and reconciliation of an intractable conflict. The book is based on events and characters that tell the reality of what happens when some of us decide to confront injustice and fight for truth after hearing the voice of conscience. It is a story about the people in Kashmir and how their way of life abruptly came to an end, facing a genocidal violence. Bigotry and intolerance by Islamists of Kashmir towards the Hindus permanently erased the last traces of a civilization that was one of the grandest and oldest in the world. He tried to give a shape to the story of annihilation in his book. Rajatji received the United Nations Public Service Award, as we mentioned. He also received NASCOM Social Innovations Honors and the Adele Give Social Innovation Honors for Gender Justice in 2010. He received these awards on behalf of the organization. Welcome, Rajatji. Next we have Gokul Kunnatji. Gokulji is the president of the United States Hindu Alliance, one of the oldest Hindu advocacy organizations in the US. He is also the co-founder of the Hindu Students Council, the largest Hindu youth organization in North America. He has been a Hindu activist since childhood and has been involved in many Hindu organizations in India and the United States. He's a social architect who enjoys working with the youth to create a better world for tomorrow. He is a resident of Atlanta and very involved in local and national affairs when it comes to Hindus. So welcome, both of you. Rajatji, we will start with you first. Tell us first, let's talk about what is intergenerational trauma and what is gaslighting. These were like two very important words that came out when we were doing some research about what you have written and stuff like that. So can you enlighten us on that?
Sure. Intergenerational trauma is something that has been in vogue since in the last 30 to 40 years, because research has shown that how trauma is transferred across from generation to generation. Now, the language of trauma is silence. Like, trauma is not something that we eloquently speak about. I mean, for example, if your family has gone through a trauma, you will not be sitting across your dinner table and talking about it, right? So, but everybody knows that, what has happened, like why we, what are the certain topics in the home which are not to be discussed, which are not to be talked about, and we create our own structures inside ourselves to carry it on. So, for example, let's take when the Kashmiri Hindus, they ran away. It is not something that they discuss sitting across the table, but the trauma is very much there, and the trauma is passed on in silence. So the first generation kind of is aware that something is happening. It's something that happened with the last. The second generation, then the survival issues are kind of over, and then they start thinking about discussing that what happened, what really happened with our parents. So, for example, we talked of Jews. After the Holocaust, the first generation of Jews did not talk about the trauma. It's very important to know that. The generation that came after that, because for the first generation, what was most important was that we have survived, and they were going, and their brains, as we call it, are still in the survival mode. So they did not discuss the trauma. The generation after that started asking questions, reconstructing what happened. Then the generation after that said, we need questions, what really happened to our grandfathers or to our fathers. And that is how trauma is transferred across from generation to generation. If we believe that by not talking about it, we put a closure to it, we don't. So, for example, slavery, the way the blacks in the United States, the Native Americans, or say people under colonialism, they carry the trauma in a way which their forefathers went through several generations ago. The effects last. So that is what is called intergenerational trauma, and that has been researched upon, and it is now something that is very much established and talked about in clinical psychology. The second is gaslighting. Gaslighting is the relationship, between the perpetrator and the victim, where the perpetrator makes the victim question his very own narrative. Like, you are somewhere responsible for that. Did it really happen? So the perpetrator somewhere confuses the victim, and so the victim can never raise the issue as a result of that. Like, for example, in Kashmir, the Kashmiri Muslims have been able, with their many allies and assistants, been able to confuse the Kashmiri Hindu to a great extent about the issue that took place. Or it happened because, Jagmohan came and took you all away. Or there are many narratives, right? Each narrative is chosen whenever the occasion demands it. So that is a phenomena called gaslighting, where the perpetrator, in a very clever, manipulative way, confuses, starts altering the mindset of the victim so that the victim can never raise the issue.
Absolutely. I think those two important points we'll come back to, because there are some stories that I've read through your work, and I want to have a conversation with you on that. So Gokulji, actually, I have a question for you. People may be wondering, you're not Kashmiri, and you're from Kerala, way far down south. So what is your connection with Kashmir?
Namaste, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. Glad to be on a panel with Rajat ji. My father had served in Kashmir as a soldier, so we have a family connection to Kashmir. Apart from that, the first Kashmiri friend that I had, he was killed in 1990 by the jihadi terrorists. Advocate Premnath Bhatt, a very popular humanitarian lawyer who helped the poor, marginalized, many Muslim clients. he was brutally killed in the streets of Kashmir. So that's very personal to me. As you know, Adi Shankaracharya from Kerala has traveled to all parts of Bharat. And even today in Srinagar, there is a hill called Shankaracharya Hill. On top of it is a Saraswati temple. And therefore, for all Hindus coming as far south as Kerala, Kashmir has a very sacred place in our hearts, in our lives. So we wanted to go and visit Jammu and Kashmir. Unfortunately, even in 1997, I could only go to Jammu and, of course, met many people, but was not able to go to Kashmir. At the time, even people in Jammu was not feeling safe. There could be attacks, there could be violence. So it was a time when there was significant turbulence, even way after all the Hindus and Sikhs had left the valley. So that's, in summary, my connection to Kashmir. And as you know, Kashmir, as Vivek ji said, has been the center of learning in ancient times. And many of the customs, traditions that we Hindus have throughout the country in India, as well as around the world, we got it from Kashmir. So we are connected to Kashmir in ways that no one can break. It's a permanent link to Kashmir. If you are a Hindu, you will be connected to Kashmir. And that's one of the reasons why India can never let Kashmir go. If there is no Kashmir, there is no India.
Wonderful. And I think that that documenting that history is also very important. I think someone mentioned here, there's no collective understanding of identifying with this genocide as Indian people. You know, it's like something that's happened far out. Oh, it happened with Kashmir. What's the problem in Kerala? You know, no problem in Kerala. Let's just continue on. So I think the documenting of that history, because we are one as a community, as a society, as Hindus. So when one part of your body hurts, the entire body hurts. And that's the way we have to collectively think about this. So Rajatji, coming back to you, actually, we're talking about these stories and documenting. One of the articles that I recently read was about this, at the South Asian Heritage Forum, there was a story of a girl named Neha. And she had, talked to you after one of your conversations, and she had mentioned that she's now speaking up a lot more than she used to. And she used to live in a camp where they only were doing two things, right? One, it was a taboo to talk about the trauma and the genocide that they experienced, but also she was considered basically like a prostitute many times, because only prostitutes live in camps, right? In these bare places, barren places with bare bone facilities. Only prostitutes tend to live like that. So this is the kind of situation of Kashmiri Pandits that has become, even today. This is not a story from like 30 years ago. This is a story pretty recently. So, what are your thoughts on that? How is that really the case of how people in the people in the camps, Kashmiri camps feel today?
I would say yes. We worked in the camps for many years. As psychologists, we were asked to work in the camps. And there are certain things about the camp which I need to tell you. The first is that the camps, they are surrounded by brick lanes. And there is a very difficult fume that is always there. And when we were there in the daytime, I'm talking of almost 18 years ago, more than that, we could feel there's some problem that is happening in our chest. And we felt that why are these people placed at a place like this where there are such, brick lanes all around. And then it struck us. They told us that they have put us over here to kill us so that we die, so that our, morbidity kind of goes up. So, this is the way people in the camps very often, you cannot kill them straight away, but you can kill them by different means. So we stayed in the night, and by the time we woke up in the morning, we were having, chest pains and coughs, right? All of us. So that's one, it was an extermination strategy. It was not to let them, live on. The second was that we used to hold groups, and we had women psychologists along with us. My wife was there. She's a woman psychologist. She's a Kashmiri too, and she was working with the women's groups. And after some time, the women started sharing that they were sexually assaulted. And this they had not shared with anyone. They had kept it to themselves. And one of the women said that, when I talked to a police officer about that, my husband and others did, they said, ki India mein jaake case karna, no cases over here for you people, go and do it in India. So we decided to be silent, and the women said that, if we talk about it, it's very painful for our men because they feel that they could not protect us. So we keep quiet about it, right? Now, the story of Neha, she was a young woman who came and asked me a question after I had given a talk some time back. This is something which I noticed, that whenever I talk about Kashmir, someone from the next generation gets up and asks questions. And what she told me is something which I've heard from many girls, that the most difficult part for them, one of the most difficult part for them was to go to the school and come back. Because when they would go and come back, there would be obscene comments would sometimes be passed. And it was assumed and thought that since they live in the camps, they are easily available, or they would do things for money. So that is the kind of comment she said that I heard. And, it shattered me when I came back. And, she said, I became also aware that even though I'm living in a camp, but my identity today has been completely shattered and, reduced to that being a camp wala, which, they were talked about. And she said, when I talked it over with other friends of mine, they said that many of them had such similar experiences, that the men, they saw them as easily available and whom they could ask for sex, and no cases would be lodged against them even if they misbehave with them. So living in camps is actually has been a terrible experience for most. And we used to hold groups with them where we used to talk about different concepts about how to increase your self-esteem, do drama therapy, do play therapy with them to come to terms with what they have gone through. So that was our experience. And I would just share one small experience from the camp, which made me write my book. One day while coming out, there was this teacher who kind of confronted our team, and he was very rude. He says, "Why do you people come here?" So I said, "We come here to work with the trauma of people." So he says, "Do you understand our trauma?" I said, "We are trying to." I did not know where this conversation is going. And then he said, "Do you know what we call this camp?" So I said, "Yeah, Muthi." So he says, "No, we call it Aurangzeb's dream." So I was struck. And I, a psychologist, I did not know how Aurangzeb, came over in the picture. And then when I went, to the privacy of my room, opened my computer, then I realized that he was referring to the story that Aurangzeb wanted to make Kashmir totally Muslim, because he was told that Kashmir is the soul of India, and if you make Kashmir Islamic, whole of India will turn Islamic. And that gentleman, by saying that this camp is Aurangzeb's dream, was saying that this is the last batch of Kashmiri Hindus that ran away and stayed here. So Aurangzeb's dream is complete. That is transgenerational trauma, right? People think in terms of generations. He thought of something that was a dream of an emperor 300 years back, and after 7 exoduses has been realized, right? So these are some of the experiences from the camp. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And we'll come back to that in a bit. I think this story is very, very important, and it's really important for us to continue to have this conversation around the camp. But also, you've done a lot of work on the terrorist in Tihar jail as well, which I'll come back to in a bit. Gokulji, my question to you is, as we talk about the suffering of the Hindus, right? Hindus have suffered in certain way, shape, or form for the last 1,200 years. Okay. Now, not from your point of history, your study of history and documentation, what are some of the key facts that we should really know, and how does this relate to what the current situation of Kashmiris is?
Yes, good question. Many of us don't know that we were subjected to genocide, perhaps for the first time, not 1200 years ago, but close to 1600 years ago. The first Hindu genocide took place in Armenia. 20,000 Hindus were killed in Armenia, and the only crime that they committed was to say no to evangelization by the Roman army. So Armenia, as you know, is the first Christian state in the world. So in that struggle, all these Hindus lost their lives. But after that, a span of approximately 400 years, you will see that things started changing in India itself. We did not have one genocide or two genocides. We have had hundreds of genocides. And we have had enough time to know about them, learn about them, and tell the world about these genocides. But we have not done that. To put things in perspective, I just wanted to give you an idea of the scope of these genocides and atrocities. We have lost between 80 to 100 million people. They were killed as part of these genocides, this violence. We had lost 1/3 of what used to be united India. As you know, when Alexander came to India, Chanakya had already started working on creating Akhanda Bharat, and subsequently, we had a united India, and united India was primarily Hindu and partially Buddhist. And 1/3 of this Akhanda Bharat or united India is no longer with the current Republic of India. So huge loss of territory. The amount of texts, both sacred as well as secular, texts on religious thought, texts on astronomy, mathematics, medicine, you name it, the amount of knowledge lost is incomparable. Just to give you an idea, the University of Nalanda, it is said that when it was put to fire, the library took 6 months to burn. So you can just visualize, imagine the amount of knowledge that is lost. Many of our people say that we don't believe in history, we have not written down anything about our ancestors, what happened, etc. One of the key reasons why we do not have a lot of documentation is because most of it is destroyed, is nowhere to be seen now. It's put to ashes. So this is a great loss, not just to Hindus or India, but to all of humanity. You look at the kind of scientific discoveries that happened in India during the ancient times. You will see that even today, whatever we have discovered, we have found, it is of enormous significance, whether it's in the field of science or medicine. Now you look at the loot that has taken place. According to one economist from Colombia, just the British loot itself is $45 trillion in today's value. 45 trillion. And that is from 1750 to 1947. Imagine what was taken between 711 AD, when Muhammad bin Qasim invaded Sindh, up to 1750, when the British came. So it's a huge amount of loot, which had made India one of the most prosperous countries, richest countries in the world, with the highest GDP, into one of the poorest third world country in the world. So knowing this has ramifications. You also see that they, just like Rajatji has mentioned, the dignity and honor of not just few hundred or thousands, but millions of Hindu women were compromised. Okay, so not only were they were raped, they were forcibly converted, they were forcibly married, and they were also sold as slaves. There are records of this, Islamic records of these, and we fail to acknowledge them even today. You also know the story of gypsies. Where did they come from? Mrs. Indira Gandhi is the first prime minister who acknowledged that they came from India. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi decided that we should formally acknowledge that they are from India, and they have made the gypsies, or what they are really called now, Roma, as people of Indian origin. All these gypsies or Roma, they are of Hindu descent. There are 13.5 million of them in the world today. 1.5 million of them were killed by Hitler. So the story of the Roma is that these were people who were bought in India, enslaved in India, and they were sold in open markets in Central Asia and beyond. It's huge. You know that the Hindu population of today is approximately 1 billion, 1 to 1.5 billion worldwide. But if you really look at the Islamic population today, there are 1.5 billion Muslims. Almost half of them have Hindu ancestry. Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, you look at the population and you will see that their ancestors were Hindus. So looking at this in a panoramic view of our loss, it is unprecedented in human history. And yet, as Vivekji has rightly put, we have failed miserably to share this information with the world. So the consequence is that the world will not be able to appreciate our pain, our suffering, and whatever is happening today. So I think it is very important, very timely for us to reflect on this loss, especially in the context of Kashmir. Kashmir should be the last region where ethnic cleansing of Hindus take place. We have to say that never again, this should be our slogan. The Jews said this after the Holocaust. It is time for us to say never again. In no part of the world, even if you are one Hindu living alone, you should not be a victim of hatred and violence. So
Indeed.
that's the importance. Many will know that the Kashmiris who lived in Kashmir before 1990, they did not realize this was coming. And you're talking about 500,000 people leaving, so many who were met with death, so many rapes, so many kidnappings. This could happen in independent, secular, democratic India, where the security forces of India are placed in that state. Imagine we have a very vibrant media in India, and yet nobody knows what happened, even today. So if you are a Hindu sitting anywhere in the world, you have to think, what happened to Hindus in Kashmir happened to Hindus throughout the ages, all across Asia. And the only crime that the Hindu did is the Hindu failed to learn from history, to acknowledge history and be alert on whatever is happening in his surroundings. You cannot do that anymore. That time is gone. So this is the time for awakening. This is the time to acknowledge, yes, we have done a lot of good things. We have discovered great things, but we also had a lot of loss, a lot of suffering, a lot of pain. And we must share that, because we don't want not only ourselves to be victims in future, but nobody else anywhere in the world should be victims of this kind of hatred, bigotry, violence, persecution, and genocide. And that's why we should lead from the front.
Yeah. So no, that's a great point. And, this is a very important topic, and we're going to be discussing this as a separate conversation, because the documentation of the 1600 years that you mentioned is extremely important for us, because that trauma continues to carry, and we have been silent on that whole front so far. Thanks to social media and thanks to many things are coming out more and more. Even scholarship is being redefined. But coming back to the point about sort of experiencing trauma, I want to talk to Rajatji about this one point. You had done some interviews in Tihar jail, and in that you had discussed that you talked to some terrorists who actually said how this entire operation of the ethnic cleansing / genocide of Kashmiri Hindus was pre-planned, and how they actually felt good about it. They talked about, like, they deserved it. They, we wanted to make sure that we don't use 400,000 bullets. Rather than that, we would use intimidation techniques to kick them out. Tell us about that experience, and like, what does that show you about kind of the concerns that you had of how people talk about trauma?
Okay, that's a very important question. And it was also raised by a first generation survivor to me, because many survivors, they don't get their answers from their parents. Their parents, their grandparents, they say, are totally silent. And very often they come to a seminar or workshop to get answers for themselves. It's a personal quest. So this girl, she asked me that, what do you think? I mean, how did our neighbors behave? Because, our parents talk about Kashmiria, it was wonderful neighbors. Pata nahi ek din achanak kaise ho gaya. So, but when we all left in such hordes, almost 500,000 people, what was their reaction like? Why didn't they come and stop? Why didn't they just say ki mat jaiye? I mean, we are living side by side for generations, right? What was their behavior like? So when she asked that question, it was very disturbing for me, because I realized that I'll have to probably tell her something that she may not have heard, but she may have just picked it up somewhere. So it was while taking a group with people in Tihar jail. I worked there for almost 15 years, and there was one group over there which was called the Pattharbaz group. Like in Tihar, groups are separated according to what is their speciality. So this was a group which was called Pattharbaz group, or means stone throwers group, right? And they were from Kashmir. So I used to hold a group with some of, with very select groups. Like there were groups with, speciality was this and that. And when they learned that I'm not from police, I'm not from prisons, talking to me is not going to have, any way jeopardize them. They became very open about talking about their philosophy. And they talked about what stone throwing means to them. And stone throwing meant that, it's as if they are picking up something from the earth and taking Allah's name and making it powerful and making it equally powerful to a bullet and throwing it at the army, throwing it at the object, and in the process, going ahead and, causing a lot of havoc in the thing. Because for them, it's like a stone in hand is equal to a gun. That is the kind of thinking that, goes on for them. And then they described it in the group that 19th January, I don't know how that topic came about, but they said that, some of us, our parents, our mothers, gave us new clothes to wear and go and see the Kashmiri Hindus leaving. There was a kheer, a kind of a pudding, rice pudding, which was made. There were guns fired, not at the people who were running, but it's like a celebration that was taking place. And they said that not even when, there is an India-Pakistan match going on and Pakistan wins, is there that kind of celebration that ever takes place, which took place on that day. So I had searched for the newspapers, other reports. I did not find this anywhere, their reaction. So I wrote back to that girl through email to say that this is the way they felt. And she wrote back to me to say that this is something I always knew, but whenever I would ask my parents, they would say, कि हमको एक दिन वापस जाना है, we have to go back one day, so we should not talk like this. But I know we are not going back, not in this generation, not in the second generation after me. I will not, I would like to visit, but I know they won't let us come in, right? So I can say that those people, they really wanted us to go. It was not a few bad apples which did it, but it was the mass. It was the whole mass of Kashmiri Muslims who threw us out. The slogans were there from all the mosques. People were in large processions, our neighbors, shouting at us, saying that either convert or leave your women behind. So it was a mass phenomena. It was a mass movement that threw us out. And this is what I know for sure, from now on. So this is a realization that has taken place in the Kashmiri Hindus right now, to realize that it was a mass movement that threw them out. It was not just a conspiracy of a few people, right? Their average banal neighbor whom they trusted wanted them to go and turn homicidal, a killer on that day, to throw them out. That's why Kashmir happened. And let us not, just create another theory about it. That was the plain stark truth.
Amazing. This is like really amazing. And this story and the next panel will talk about some of these stories as well. But what really amazes me is that the media has been completely silent on these things. Someone asked a question saying, why has the media been very silent? Even in the 1990s, 89, I was just a young boy in India, and I had never heard of this stuff, right? And then even coming over here, I had not heard much about it. So why has the media been so silent? Like this is a question that somebody had. So Rajatji, what do you think of that?
The media has been silent for the very simple reason that it was not a story for them. That's all, right? Story about Hindus is their trauma, what they go through. It is not considered as a story. It is plain, simple like that. In a large number of international human rights conferences, when I have tried to talk about Kashmiri Hindus and their trauma, they are surprised. They say that, why are you talking about Hindu trauma? Does something like that exist, right? So you have to see that the concept of Hindu trauma, there is a massive denial around it, right? Now, I can give you a parallel example. I worked in Gujarat after the riots, and I was our organization was asked by National Human Rights Commission to work with the traumatized victims, right? And one of the things which I understood, while talking, is that I was not supposed to work with the victims who were burnt alive in the train. Yeah, okay. So, it was not said to me clearly, but that was something that was, I implicitly understood. So, when we went to submit the report, and it was to the then, ex-Chief Justice of India, and we talked of you will see one thing about Gujarat riots. You will not see that when 58 Hindus were burnt alive, it is called a pogrom or a massacre. It is only called train burning. So when we went, we wrote that it is not train burning, it is a pogrom. It was a planned, systematized, organized murder, and that is the way it should be put. And that is the way we had put in our report. And we were told that, why are you doing this, right? So the concept of Hindu trauma has not existed. It does not exist, and there is a massive denial that, covers everything, and the media therefore only follows that, right? So for media, it has to be a story. So until unless we break this denial ourselves first about that there is existence of Hindu trauma, and we go ahead and let it capture people's imagination, the media will not make it into a story. So therefore, it was not a story then, and it is also not a story right now. I mean, you see, for example, in recent Delhi riots, the media has not carried about what happened to the Hindus, right? So it is as if it is a total culture of silence that pervades around it. Because if you bring that up, everything else will also start tumbling out. It is like opening, Pandora's box. If time permits, I can share a short story about Birla Temple, which you may have read. Birla Temple was made in 1939, right? And if you see Delhi, there is no large temple whose spires can be seen for almost 1,000 years prior to that, right? Why? Because, for the very simple, I mean, you have the Delhi full of mosques. You have Delhi, there are churches which are 300 years old. But despite Hindus being experts in Shilpa Shastra and where they can make temples, there aren't any. The reason is downrightly simple. It is that Hindus were so scared of making a temple, so scared of building one, that they did not build it for 1,000 years. That is intergenerational trauma. Now, I tell you a very quick incident before I stop. Somebody wrote to me to say, you are wrong. And there is a temple called Hanuman Temple, which is very old, and this exists. So you're wrong about it. So I said, okay. You go and check the picture of Hanuman Temple. Just check it on the net and tell me. So he checked it and said, what is it? I mean, he thought that I'm asking a very silly and stupid question. So I said, it's spire. How long do you think, it can be seen? He says, yeah, not very far away. And I said, look at the spire again closely. So he says, what are you talking about? I said, look at it. He said, yeah, there is a moon over there. I say, yes, that is the Islamic moon given by the Emperor Akbar to put on top. That's why it was not destroyed. And that's a small temple. It is probably 1/4 or 1/5 of a normal temple. That's why it was not destroyed. So it took me several times to tell you, and then you noticed it. That's why it was not destroyed, right? He says, okay. He just kept, totally silent after that. So we need to be, careful. We need to see it with open eyes. And only when we break the culture of denial will also the media follow through. That's what I feel. Otherwise, they won't take us seriously.
No, absolutely. That's a very, very powerful story. Thank you, Rajatji, for sharing that. And those stories do mean a lot nowadays, thankfully, because of social media and many people, and we'll hear from some of them a little bit later today and tomorrow. These stories are coming out, and we need to continuously have open platforms that can challenge the current narrative about Hindus in the media. So, Gokulji, I have a question for you. Let's talk about Western history for a second. You're very familiar with Western history. What do we learn from the West on this particular point, especially the global Jewish diaspora?
The West is the most organized region in the world in many ways. And when it comes to recording history, teaching history, making sure that the world knows what West has gone through, they are extremely good at it. And the most visible, the most successful example of that is the work of the Jewish diaspora in both Europe and North America. I slightly would like to modify what Rajatji has said. It is true that victims undergo a trauma, and generations of victims suffer from the trauma, even if they do not have any direct experience. But it is also true that those who witness trauma, those who witness genocide, doesn't normally have the same kind of psychological issues in sharing the truth, sharing the experience. When you talk about Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, for example, like Rajat ji said, there are many who even now they see a symbol or they hear the word Hitler. It is so horrifying that they cannot, they cannot behave normally. So it does have an impact. It's a lasting impact for many. But that didn't prevent the Jewish community from sharing what the Holocaust was all about with the rest of the world. You have Elie Wiesel, for example. We all know, the great American poet. What has he written that is so profound? He wrote about the suffering of his Jewish brothers and sisters in Germany that would make us reflect on what we are as human beings. It appeals to the world in general, not just Jews. So through poetry, as Vivek ji said, he has made a clarion call to the Hindu world to document, and I want to just expand that a little bit. Jews started making movies about Holocaust from the 1940s. There are close to 3,000-4,000 movies on the Holocaust. Now, if you look at the casualty of the Holocaust, 6 million Jews and 1.5 million Roma, happened almost 80 years ago, 75 years ago. Now, within a short span of time, Europe witnessed such a major calamity, man-made calamity. A man who is pledged to exterminate groups of people because he thought they are inferior. This idea that I am superior and everybody else is inferior is a very powerful motive for many people in the world to do a lot of harm. And it's a story that we must therefore tell the world so that the world can protect itself from such kind of ideologies, such kind of mindsets, such kind of tyrants like Hitler. So one of the things that I would like to appeal to Hindus, especially those Hindus who are not under any kind of trauma. We can write about it, write articles, write books. We can write blogs, as Vivek ji said. We need to make documentaries. We need to make movies. We need to have exhibitions. We need to have museums. Isn't it sad that there are Holocaust museums throughout the world, especially the Western world? There is not even a single museum that would tell the people what happened in South Asia till today. I know François Gauthier-ji has made an attempt to do something in Pune, but it doesn't do justice to the victims. It doesn't do justice to future generations of our people. We need to have a museum of Hindu Holocaust in New Delhi where millions and millions and millions of people would visit it. They will know by looking, by reading, by experiencing what our ancestors went through. This is what is needed. We need people to write stories of their own lives. Imagine 500,000 people being kicked out of their ancestral land, people who have lived there for 7,000, 8,000 years. Each one of them has a story, and each of their story is valuable to the world. So my appeal would be to every Kashmiri, get out of this fear psychosis that has become dominant in the community. You are free. You belong to a community which sacrificed a lot for your freedom. Had it not been for the sacrifices of our ancestors, who actually fought for us, for Dharma, we would not be Gokul and Rajatji and Nikunj. We would be Abdullah, Salim, Muhammad. We wouldn't exist. We exist. We enjoy our Dharma. We enjoy our customs. We enjoy our traditions only because millions sacrificed their lives. So as part of our duty to our forefathers, we must acknowledge that we have to share our history, both good and bad, what happened to us. And that would be a very important duty for our future generations. They don't know what we are talking about sometimes. Once you read something about Kashmir and you tell kids, in their eyes, you are a radical, you are an extremist, you are narrow-minded. I mean, 500,000 people in 1990 leaving their place, going through such persecution, is ignored, is denied, as Rajatji rightly said. This pattern of denial, which Jews have successfully addressed in the past and present. They have scholars constantly, saying, this Jewish Holocaust denial cannot be accepted. Anyone who denies Holocaust in Germany, they're prosecuted. Okay? So we need to understand that it is important for all of us to acknowledge what happened, to document what happened, and this can be in itself a topic for a global conference, because it requires a lot of resources, financial resources, to publish books, publish documentaries, to produce movies. And the good thing is that there are people out there who are capable of doing such acts, and they don't have to do it by losing money. You can be successful when a Jewish producer like Steven Spielberg produces a movie on Holocaust. He's not losing money. He's making a lot of money. But more importantly, he is telling the world what happened to the Jewish people. So we have to do the same thing. We have to stop these Bollywood movies, these regional language movies, which involve a man and a woman running around trees. This is 2020. We have to deal with real stories that has impact on our lives, impact on our future. This is the way to go. So I think it's very critical. You can imagine, I don't know of any girl or boy in today's world who haven't read the story of the Austrian Jewish girl, and forgetting, and yeah. So she has written so beautifully, eloquently. She's only a little girl who wrote a diary, and today it's well known. So it's not something that older people need to do, young people need to do, old people need to do, men and women need to do, scholars need to do, ordinary people need to do. Everybody has a story, and I hope there are like 500,000 books written in the future just on the Kashmir ethnic cleansing, the Kashmir genocide. And if you look, there are only a few thousand left in Kashmir today. So it's unacceptable that in the modern world there can be such extermination, in such a large scale, and the world remains quiet about it. And I don't blame the world; I blame ourselves. We have to speak out, and we have to speak out loudly.
Indeed, indeed. So we're coming close to our session. I wanted to leave some time for kind of the future. How do we reconcile this? What is the path to reconciliation, if at all, right? Are there ways, a lot of Kashmiri Hindus are speaking out after the abrogation/nullification of 370. There are talks of going back to the Kashmir Valley to resettle, things like that. But how do you overcome the trauma? How do you reconcile with trauma? I'm not saying we should forget about it, but what are ways to ensure, number one, as Gokulji and Rajat, you yourself said, that this doesn't happen again, never again. But at the same time, how do we make sure that things are reconciled and there is a positive future for the generation coming forward? Rajatji.
I think we have to study from the way there has been reconciliation between perpetrators and victims in other situations, whether in South Africa or between Germany and the Jews, and between Native Americans and whites who exterminated them, blacks and whites. So there are certain things which are important to keep in mind. One is that the quarrel between evidence and memory. We don't have much of evidence, but we have our memory, and we need to trust our memory. We need to say that, yes, this is what happened. For example, if tomorrow you try to prove that, okay, what is the evidence that, there were all the loudspeakers were blaring from the mosque and they were saying that, leave or convert, right? What is the evidence for that? There is only the memory left with us, and we need to trust our memory. And it is important to know that the Jews did the same. They trusted their memory more than the evidence. I mean, if we go for the case of, Deborah Lipstadt, who had to prove that there were actually concentration camps and Jews were killed, because a significant percentage of white intellectuals in Europe, they said that all this thing about concentration camps is a hogwash. And she and her team had to go and prove the Holocaust. They took 4 years intensive research at the concentration camps to prove it. So it's meticulous research that proves it is not something that happened. I mean, the world did not come to the aid of Jews. The Jews had to prove their ground, and they had to show that this is what had happened, right? That's one. So it is the internal strength of yours that will carry it forward. The second thing is that very few people know that when Israel was born, the British had told the Arabs that it will be no time before you finish the Jews, because they could not, I mean, they went like lambs to Hitler's concentration camps, and the few who are left, you can finish them off, and they are not fighters, they are traitors. And yet, the Jews, they fought really like brave soldiers, and they were puzzled that how did these people who could be led like lambs for slaughter suddenly have turned into brave soldiers. Jewish psychologists have analyzed that phenomena, and they have shared with me that how they changed from being an individual to a collective, and that is where their strength came from. They no longer, the Jew in Europe thought himself as an individual. The Jew in Israel thought of himself as part of a larger collective. That was the difference. That is why they fought so well, and Jewish soldiers today are recognized as the best soldiers. Jews have never been soldiers in history, right? So it's the same story for us. We need to understand that we need to turn ourselves into a collective. And there are ways by which we need to do that. There are symbols which bind us together. Our collective past and our collective trauma binds us together. And it is not something very hard. It is just that I need to know that I share a history with you that cannot be changed. And we need to talk about it. We need to capture imagination, because even though we are in a digital age, and somebody said that, we need information and it's the age of information, but it is still remains the age of imagination. Until unless you capture people's imagination, you will not have them on your side. And that is what the people who have turned the tide in their favor have been able to do so. And I would say that that's where lies the key for the future, is that how do we capture the imagination of the world by what we have gone through? That is the line along which we need to start thinking.
Absolutely. No, thank you for your insights, Rajat-ji. Gokulji, we have a couple of more minutes, so maybe you want to give your thoughts on what the way forward, and also what are we doing here in North America, right? Maybe you want to share a few points about that too. Please go ahead.
Okay. As we all know, India now has administrative control, effective administrative control over Jammu and Kashmir. But it is also true that large chunks of Jammu and Kashmir is still not with India. It's being occupied. It has been annexed. So the Kashmir story continues. It is still evolving. There has not been any closure. Now, as far as the Hindus, Sikhs, and others who had left the Kashmir region because of the threats and the persecution, they have to return to their ancestral land as early as possible. Now, for us who are sitting here and who have not experienced this trauma, it might be easier for us to say, okay, you can all go back now. But as if a rape victim is asked to go back and live near a rapist, she will decline and she will be adamant about her position. So I could appreciate very much, what the Hindus and Sikhs who have left, they are thinking. There has to be security for them to live there peacefully, and there are many suggestions in front of the government, and I'm hopeful that given the unfriendly atmosphere around India's borders, all states that are bordering India would have to have a significant number of ex-veterans, ex-servicemen settle there and live there to protect India from future threats. And I'm hopeful that normalcy will return. Whatever happened in Kashmir is primarily because of interference from Pakistan. We all know that. So most of the Kashmiri Muslims now want to live in peace, just like majority of the Muslims in India. So I don't think Muslims are going to buy these jihad ideas anymore. It has caused them harm, just as it has caused harm to the world. So I am hopeful that Hindus and others will return to Kashmir. There will be a lot more development. Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs, they'll be able to return to their sacred places, and I'm hopeful, that Kashmir will regain its lost glory in the future. We need to work towards that, and the people who are outside of Kashmir are part of that effort or initiative as much as the people who have lived there and who had left.
Yes, indeed. And I think with that, I want to thank both of you for joining the panel today and talking about the experiences of documenting trauma, intergenerational trauma, what Hindus have suffered for many years in different capacities. And I really appreciate your insights. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you.
So next up, we're going to have a interesting panel with 3 Kashmiri Pandits. Here, the panel's objective is to discuss the situation during the 1980s and 90s, what the Kashmiri Hindus faced, why that happened, what are some of the historic dynamics behind it, and where did they see the path forward. So I wanted to welcome all three. Let's do a quick audio check. I think everyone's mics are, please make sure your mics are unmuted. Okay, great. Namaste and welcome all.
Namaste.
I want to do some quick introductions. So I'll start with Ashish ji. Ashish Dhar is a Kashmiri Hindu living in exile in New Delhi. He is a mechanical engineer by training and a social entrepreneur by occupation. He is the co-founder of Upward, an alternative media outlet that produces audio-visual content and commentary on social cultural issues like the Hindu temple autonomy, judicial reform, civilizational conflicts like Kashmir, and so on. Ashish ji is also the operations head of the Indic Collective Trust, which is a legal research and activism forum that represents Indic civilization positions in legal cases of national and international significance. Welcome, Ashish ji. Swapna ji is a Kashmiri Hindu activist, Swapna Reina, who was born and raised in Srinagar, Kashmir. She moved to the US in 1993 and currently works in the financial services industry. Even though she moved here 27 years ago, she continues to be an active member of the displaced Kashmiri Pandit community. As a result of her close involvement and personal experience that she has faced during the Exodus, she is able to closely relate to the collective pain faced by the community with a hope that justice will be served someday. Welcome, Swapna ji.
Namaskar.
And last but not least, Dr. Surinder Kaul. Dr. Surinder Kaul is a physician residing in Houston and the international coordinator for the Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, or GKPD, which is a collective organization with members in India, USA, Australia, Canada, Singapore, and Europe. It consists of volunteers who have pledged to work towards the betterment of the Kashmiri Pandit community at all levels, be it political or social, economic, and cultural. Dr. Kaul studied medicine at Srinagar Medical College and came to the US to pursue higher education, finishing his residency at Stony Brook University. Dr. Kaul has been passionately involved in community service in Kashmir since the age of 16 and carries that passion through his work in GKPD and other channels. So namaskar and welcome everybody. Really excited to have you all on the platform. Well, I want to start with Ashish ji. Ashish ji, let's talk about the history of Kashmir a little bit. You know, you've read a lot of articles and I've read some of them. What was the influence of Hinduism in Kashmir? And you know, from what I understand is Kashmir has been the oldest, well, one of the oldest seats of Shaivite Hinduism and Hindu philosophy. So let's maybe shed a light a little bit on that.
Yeah, so I mean, there's enough written about it, so I'll make it short. Kashmir has been the fountainhead of the Hindu civilization in a lot of ways, because a lot of the Hinduism that became popular in other parts of country, by Hinduism I mean a lot of the philosophy and the rituals and the darshanas that became popular, the sampradayas that spread all over India, had their roots in Kashmir. And Kashmiri Shaivism is, of course, even today, is one of the most popular forms of Hinduism all across the world. So Kashmir had been, pretty much the center of Hindu spiritual and intellectual life for the Hindu civilization, for the Indian civilization, so to speak. But it all changed in the somewhere around the 14th century, when Islam came to Kashmir, and again the events around that are pretty well known. How it got, it was almost an accidental affair that that one of the first usurpers of the throne of the Kashmir Valley uh, happened to embrace Islam for various political reasons, and from then on, it has been a steady decline of the influence of the Indic civilization. We've been slowly and steadily being pushed to the periphery, and ultimately, in 1990, we were literally thrown out. So it's been a very long and painful, traumatic struggle for the people of Kashmir, including those that got converted. But like Swami Vivekananda had said, anyone who goes out of the pale of Hindus becomes an enemy, no less. Right. So that's been the story of Kashmir as far as the civilizational aspect of it is concerned.
Thank you. So Surinderji, let's talk about the events of 89-90. What actually happened at that time? Maybe you want to shed some light on kind of what the picture was at that time. I believe you were actually there at that time. So
Absolutely. First of all, I would like to commend CONA, Coalition of Hindus of North America, and all our organizations and societies who have now collaborating with Kashmiri Pandit cause. Thank you for that. I'm very happy that we have Ashish ji and Sapna ji in the panel, and Ashish ji is our budding star who has done lots of research and continues to do so, and more power to him. Well, 89-90, the things of radicalization was there right from the beginning. And there were elements, radical elements. But what happened is that there was a leadership, to some extent, the radicalization was a bit controlled. Now, all of a sudden, there was a vacuum in the leadership. And this vacuum made these radicalized voices become more powerful. And it was exploited initially through Pakistan, through Operation Tupac, and their proxies got activated. And we saw the mayhem that we have seen in Syria and Iraq. We saw it in 1989 and 1990s. And that is, in fact, it became a fountainhead of a global terror, because then the whole terror machinery became an industry. Now, we became victims of genocide and ethnic cleansing. There were brutalities, barbaric killings. And for a minuscule community at that time, there was no communications, because we didn't have social media, we don't have even telephone connections. So what was happening in the villages, what was happening in pockets, which was pretty rampant, and we were not able to perceive the amount of hatred and the amount of brutalities that were happening, because it was remaining in the close environment in 89s, 90s. And then eventually, when the whole mob came out, it looked like that the humanity has died in Kashmir. The politicians who were part of the administration, they left everything at the mercy of these terror elements, and we had nobody to fend. And it was pathetic for each and every family, the way things they saw, and the way no help, and we left overnight, keeping the whole baggage and everything that maybe is a temporary phenomenon, and we'll come back in 15 days once the things will settle down. And it never happened. Now these voices became more and more vociferous, and the whole nexus that was unleashed by Pakistan got a lot of support from these sleeper cells who were sleeping and became very active on the ground. And the political administration, the mainstream political parties, so-called, were also radicalized. And they were competing at who is more radical. And they left whole open ground for them to do whatever they can do. And eventually this whole trajectory started, and now it is 31 years that those 15 days we were thinking will go back. It never happened. And there was complete genocide and ethnic cleansing that happened over that span of time. And the successive governments in India, they were muted. They were silent. The media, the judiciary, no suo motu action on this magnitude. This was in the free, independent India that a huge section of the community en masse had to leave, and there was no voice.
Indeed. And that's a very, very unfortunate thing. So,
And
Apnaji,
the
I want
trajectory,
go
the
ahead.
successive governments, how they happen now, what happened that eventually the voices, the terror elements, the radical mindset, they were there in the valley. Now, because of the muted response of the government of India, of successive governments, they became so emboldened. And in the trajectory, they created not only the nexus of the Islamic fundamentals, they widened their scope. They included Dalits in that, they included leftists, they included ultra leftists, and it appeared to be a war. And I remember that outside the parliament, just 2 kilometers away, there was a big anti-national event going on, wherein there were voices against India raised in the hub of our capital. This was the utter degradation of the administration, both at the government of India level and state level had already succumbed. And we didn't know what to do. And this whole story continued. And now for last 5-6 years, at least the awareness is coming out. What happened? It was gagged. It was just kept under the carpet as if nothing has happened, as if it was just isolated cases, something. And once the people knew the magnitude of the genocide and ethnic cleansing, it became more, and we are a small, minuscule community, but we kept our stories alive. All 30 years, we kept stories alive that one day, someday, we need to inform everyone what is going on. Not because of the hatred toward Islam, but to know, to caution all the sections of India that what is happening with us will also happen with you. And that thing came true when we saw there were almost 500 Pakistans in India. So that is the story in a nutshell. I mean, I know we have limited time, and I know Sapnaji there. So I will go back to you and address when there are some more questions coming up.
Oh, no worries. There's more coming. Don't worry. I think this is a very powerful example of what you just mentioned about, like, utter lack of coverage and utter lack of storytelling, and which continues even today. So, Apnaji, I want to come to you. Tell us a little bit. What type of your experience at that time? You were there physically. Want to understand your experience. What did you experience at that time?
Sure. First of all, again, thank you, Kona, for giving us a platform, a much-needed platform to the Kashmiri community, the voice that needs to be heard, our stories that need to be told. I was born and brought up in Kashmir, so 89, 90, at the peak of all the disturbances, I was there. But let me tell you this, Nikunji, it did not happen overnight, which Ashish ji and Surinder ji also mentioned. It was going on for a long time. The coffee was brewing. It just had not, brewed to the max. I experienced this. Both my parents were in government jobs, so they were posted in rural areas. So back to what Surendraji said, maybe in the main cities you didn't see much, but there was a lot going behind the scenes. All this, the preparations were going on. Came a point much before 89, 90, when everything really was at its peak. My parents decided to shift to Srinagar, thinking, that's a safer place. Because we heard the rumblings, we could see it. Both my parents, my mom since passed on, but my dad, both are doctors. They used to cater to the community, just the medical profession. There is no caste, creed, religion. Everybody was the same. But I think it hit home when my dad was in we had our own little hospital. My dad was seeing patients. And this guy was all about, Dr. Saab, you saved my life and everything. And all of a sudden there's a mob, gathering right outside our main gate. And what hit home is the same guy, same patient who was so sick, was, all praise for my dad for getting him on the path to healing, was outside with that mob throwing stones at the house. That is when it was like, nope, we have young kids, I have a daughter, we're not staying here. So it started there. Then small things, how all of this happened. I went to women's college. I don't know. I know there are a lot of people who have tuned in right now, and maybe Surendraji can relate to it, or Ashish ji. We used to go to the college. We didn't realize all of a sudden, like the Muslim girls used to cover, most of them used to cover their head. And there used to be this guy with stick. He used to really hit the girls on their legs if their head was not covered, and used to get away with it every single time because everybody said, hey, you chumot in Kashmiri, meaning like, he's crazy, don't worry about him, he doesn't know what he's doing. But now when you look back and think about it, he definitely knew what he was doing. He was creating that fear, and that's when the ladies started going out. We used to hide our dejhors, the bindis were off our foreheads. Something was cooking and people knew, and all of a sudden it precipitated the night of January 19th, 1990. So yeah, every time I'm asked to, or I volunteer to speak on such public forums and gatherings, trust me, it brings back a lot of bad memories. And but it's worth talking about it because the world needs to know. It's a shame there's no acknowledgement. It's a shame that Kashmiri Pandits are still asked to give proof of what happened to them. It's a shame that we are told that it was a political game where Kashmiri Pandits were asked to leave their homes overnight. Truth needs to be told. I think we are on the right path, but let us not rest till there's acknowledgement that, yes, there was a genocide of Kashmiri Pandits. So, this is something, even though it brings a lot of pain and hurtful memories, this is something that I want to talk about all the time. It's not going to change anything that happened with us growing up. My own grandfather was shot dead in broad daylight. It's not going to change that. It's not going to bring him back. But it's going to create awareness in the world that, yes, this happened. Kashmiri community is not going to be extinct. They need to acknowledge. They need to accept the fact that it happened. Political situation. We were protesting outside, Parliament in Delhi. Keep in mind, we came from Kashmir, the weather there, and all of a sudden, May, June, we are in Delhi in blistering heat. We're out in the streets. We are facing lorry charges. We are facing, water cannons, and all of a sudden, we see a ray of hope. Somebody comes out and says, "Hey, the Prime Minister wants to see a delegation. He wants to find out what's going on. What are you guys protesting about?" And Surendraji and myself and the 3 other people, we were part of that team, and we went in. And the Prime Minister then, VP Singh, that is when I knew we have to fight for ourselves. I don't know if Surendraji recalls, but the first thing that our Prime Minister said is like, "Oh, you are here. What is the issue? Why are you here?" And we are like, "We are from Kashmir." And he's like, "Oh, what's happening there?" I'm like, "Are you kidding me?" And that is when I totally lost it. Keep in mind, my beloved grandfather, I'm the oldest granddaughter, very close to my grandfather. He was a man of idol and principles. We lost him. He was on the road for 2 hours and nobody came to help him. He was a reputed honorable judge, high court judge he was, and the Prime Minister is telling me what's happening in Kashmir. That is when I think maybe young blood, maybe not having much maturity and experience, that is when I literally got up, stamped my feet, and I said, if you do not know what's happening in Kashmir, then I feel sorry for you. You know Kashmir when you guys have to come out and ask for votes, but you don't know Kashmir when this is happening to your own people. That was the situation. That is what the government was. That is what Kashmiri Pandits meant to them. They didn't know what happened in Kashmir. So that is when we started. We have to fight for ourselves. We have to create awareness. We have to create acceptance. It is painful, it's hurtful, but we'll keep talking about it. We didn't have any social platform then. I don't need a social platform. I don't need proof to tell anybody that my grandfather was shot dead in broad daylight. I know it happened. If you're asking me to give you proof, then I'm like, take a hike, I don't care. But I will raise my voice, I'll try my best in whatever small ways I can. I want to bring awareness. I want to be the voice of people for whom justice is still waiting. It's just,
I want to add something, Sapnaji, that you forgot, and just to make it more interesting and realistic, that in that meeting that she was quoting about with the Prime Minister of India, VP Singh, and once this thing happened, and when we are returning from our meeting with the Honorable Prime Minister, we got lathi charged. The whole people were lathi charged, and we were all arrested. And we were arrested for several hours. And why? Just because we brought to his notice that we have become refugees in our own country? Now, on the contrary, I had the good fortune of meeting Honorable Prime Minister Modi in Houston. And when we interacted with him, he said that aap logon ne bahut kasht jela. That was a very powerful endorsement. And that was a very emotional moment. So I'm just trying to make a sort of a analogy between the previous insensitive governments and the current Prime Minister who acknowledged the pain. But there is, we have a lot of expectations, but things are moving. Let us see where we can. So I just wanted to add this thing to Sapnaji's anecdote.
Yeah, and that's a very powerful story indeed, and there's much more to be talked about. We have good time, so we'll bring out some of these incidents as well. Ashish, I want to come to you. You call yourself an exiled Kashmiri, staying in New Delhi, right? I want to understand from you, what was your experience when you were young, around that time frame?
Right. So, I mean, there's so many stories to tell. Like, for example, when people ask me this question, I often ask a counter question. If you were to, tell me a story from your childhood, what would you choose to tell me? Because there's so much happening, right? But I think the role of story is there, and the role of a narrative is important from that standpoint, because what you narrate depends on the context in which the question is asked. It also depends on what you want to convey. I remember in the previous session, Dr. Mitra, I think he mentioned that the media did not pick up any stories when our forced exodus happened, because for them, Hindu lives don't really matter. And there's a reason behind that, right? If you dig deeper, you will find why is it that the media does not report Hindu stories. It is because it does not serve their larger interests. The media, the behemoth that it has become, the global media, serves certain agendas, and there are people who pull those strings. Vested interest groups who pull these strings of the media for their agenda to be forwarded. Unfortunately, Hindus do not have that leverage with the media. So, we are talking amongst ourselves, and I think it's an opportune moment for me to thank your organization for giving us this opportunity to share our stories. So while it is an opportunity for us to share our stories, I hope that it also is useful to the people who are listening, because like I said, if you look at the context in which stories are told, I think the story of Kashmiri Pandits has to be heard in a didactic context, in an educational sort of atmosphere, because our stories are important for other Hindu communities, especially in the vulnerable locations in India, who are facing very similar situations today that we did in the 80s. And so for them to make sense of what is happening around them, I think our stories are important. So I'll just quickly narrate a few personal experiences. My grandmother was killed in a bomb blast, and she had gone to her brother's house in Hari Singh High Street. And while she was returning to her village, she was just walking down the street, and there was a bomb blast, and she got killed. Now, she did not immediately, die. She lost consciousness, and she was transported to the Soura hospital, which was the state-of-the-art government hospital at that time. And because she was a Hindu, she was refused admission. And the famous Dr. Guru was the head of the Sher-e-Kashmir Institute of Medical Sciences back then. And he made it sure that, the precious time was lost for her to get admitted. And both my parents being doctors, they pushed hard and they were arguing with the hospital staff that, look, I mean, they were both government doctors, and in spite of that, uh, in spite of their influence in that hospital, even then she was not admitted in time. And this is a ordinary Kashmiri Hindu lady from a village, no political connection, no powerful post. All they had to do was honor the Hippocratic oath that every doctor takes. But unfortunately, that was not done, and that precious time lost. And then, when she was finally admitted, she was in coma for about a month, after which she expired. But there was, by and large, a consensus among the doctors in our circle that had there been, quick action, uh, there was at least a 50% chance that she would have been saved. But just because of her religious background, she was not given that admission, that simple privilege. So, there are so many other stories that I can tell, but this goes to, the story that I narrate is to just show that, the kind of discrimination, the kind of hostility that we faced in Kashmir was pretty scary, and this could happen to anyone. So yeah.
No, absolutely. And what happens? I want to. You've faced a lot of heat on social media for talking about your stories, and all of you have. In fact, just yesterday, I was shown how somebody was talking. One of the young people who's going to be on tomorrow was talking about their experience about a second generation Kashmiri Hindu and stuff, and they were basically called all kinds of names, from being Islamophobic to cow piss drinkers to fascists, everything that just for telling your story. But one of the very important parts from an intellectual perspective that people keep saying that, oh, only 200 Kashmiri Pandits were killed. So what's the big deal? It's not like it was a genocide. I hear this story, like this line all the time. So Ashishji, I want to get your perspective. How do you answer that question?
No, so it depends on the time frame that you're actually looking at, first of all. The loss of Kashmir's Hindu identity involves millions of people. Some converted, some died. Our ancestors have died by the thousands in a single shot, in a single day. There were like tens of thousands of people killed. And there's this famous story of the Jammu of everyone being collected and then
which is the sacred thread of the Brahmins, right?
Right. So, as far as the definition of genocide is concerned, I think if any community qualifies for that definition, I think it would be Kashmiri Hindus. If you extend the time period back to the 14th century, so it's not been a one-day affair. Kashmir has become predominantly Islamic because of Hindu genocide, and that's an undeniable empirical fact of history. The other part is, if you just isolate the 1990 event, yeah, it is true that it was just a few hundreds that got killed, but then the community itself died. We do not have a community anymore, which means that we have already lost our culture, I would argue. And so in that sense, it's a cultural genocide. So we've lost our identity, whether people were actually killed or not, but the Kashmiri Hindu identity has died, or will die in, let's say, a decade or so, if nothing miraculous happens. So we qualify for both ethnic cleansing as well as cultural genocide.
And you have been capturing these stories. I've seen some of your really nice videos that you have done on Upward and other places. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing today to bring out these stories?
Right. So Upward is, like you mentioned in the intro, that it's a it's an audiovisual platform that brings out the civilizational perspective on issues that we face every day. So what we are trying to do is that we're trying to, I mean, like I said, the mainstream media does not have any incentive to talk about Hindu stories. Even the alternative media the space is dominated by the left, given their access to funds and the kind of reach that they have. So our effort is to create world-class content, well-researched videos that speak of the civilizational perspective, that present the civilizational perspective of the Indian civilization. So we've been working on the free temples issue, on the demographic problem facing India, on free speech, on the issues that Hindus in Bangladesh and Pakistan have faced, all kinds of stuff on the Sabrimala temple, and various other aspects of the civilizational battle that we are currently involved in.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Surinderji, coming to you, actually, we've over the last, we discussed different topics that the Kashmiri Pandit community has been working on this whole week to spread awareness and stuff like that. And GKPD has been doing a lot of work to bring awareness. You're doing conferences around the world, just whether it's online and having discussions. Many things are going on. So tell us a little bit more about like the work that you do with GKPD.
GKPD, basically Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, as we call it, is basically a civil society movement of Kashmiri Pandits all around the globe. So it was very important for us to, we are a very small community and we are scattered everywhere. It's a very well-read community, and many of our community members, through their hard work and efficiency and capabilities, have reached out, have made their second home in foreign countries. And foreign countries, it's very important, talking to the Indian masses and talking to overseas civil societies about what happened. So keeping that thing in mind, we evolved this as a single platform for having a more impactful voice heard with certain lawmakers in different countries. And we also worked with mainstream organizations within our community to have a broader outreach and a broader goal set up for us. Our mission and motto is acknowledgement of genocide and ethnic cleansing. I know you asked Ashish Ji about genocide. He did say about his cultural genocide. I also want to add one more thing as generational genocide. So it is from generations to generations that this genocide has been taking place. And for 700 years, this thing has been going on. Now, there has been no acknowledgement of this genocide and ethnic cleansing. So we wanted to keep it as our mission and to highlight all these things. So as per United Nations definition of genocide, there are 5 clauses which has to be met to be defined as a genocide. And out of those 5 clauses, you need to meet only one criteria. And Kashmiri Pandits are meeting 4 out of those 5 criteria. And despite that, the National Human Rights Commission in India gave a verdict that it is akin to genocide and not a genocide. It is akin to, so they were just doing wordsmithing. And basically, so this, as a powerful voice, we are reaching out. We have a lot of plans. As regards about this abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, it is really a wonderful moment for the community that this article, which was responsible for our genocide and ethnic cleansing, has been abrogated. So it is a celebration for us. And we have been celebrating these 10 days all over the globe. So there has been events which was organized by GKPD UK, GKPD New Zealand, GKPD Canada, GKPD India, GKPD Jammu, GKPD US. So all these things are part of the awareness programs. And not only that, it doesn't have to be within the confines of the Kashmiri Hindu community. It has to go out, like Nikunj U and several other organizations, to have alliances, to bridge collaborations, to have that powerful voice, so that it is heard where it needs to be heard. So that is the motto and working of Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora.
Absolutely. So Swapnaji, how do you feel now that the Article 370 35A is done? As Surendraji said, like, obviously it's a good thing, but you had mentioned, like, when you try to tell your stories, they're very powerful and painful, but you are going forward. But I think that now that 370 35A is no longer applicable, a lot of Kashmiris are coming out with more voices, more stories. So what are your thoughts on that?
It's definitely a step in the right direction. It's a positive step and is welcomed by one and all who are like patriotic Indians and who can relate to it. For me as a person, it means it's like one country, one rule. Kashmir had its own flag. What does that mean if you're part of a country? It has to be one flag everywhere. It's the same rules and laws apply to the entire state. For women, you have equal rights. Why there's discrimination that if you marry out of your caste, out of your community, you lose, your inheritance rights and so on and so forth. Lot of positive effects of the abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, but still a lot of work. But I think one positive thing that it did, more still to be seen and to come, but hopefully everybody will agree with me, just that one sentence, abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, has brought a lot of hope, a lot of courage for people to come forward and speak up. They feel that now there is some hope, we should be talking more about it. It has rejuvenated the energy in Kashmiri Pandits, and we are again talking in full force, trying to spread our, stories. So Surendraji added generational genocide, and Ashiji talked about cultural. And when we are talking about genocide of Kashmiri Pandits, I want to make sure that we talk about not just the selective killings that happened during this period where Hindus and non-Muslims were selectively killed brutally. A lot of Kashmiri Pandits and a lot of people who left Kashmir got killed in these camps, snake bites, extreme. They are victims of this as well. Please, let's not forget that. I agree, they didn't face the bullets or the bombs, but why did they die? It is part of this. So we should not let their sacrifice go in vain. It's not just my grandfather who got shot point blank or somebody. They suffered equally. And there was a point earlier in the earlier panel that why has media been silent? Unfortunately, for the longest time, media has not only been silent, but they have been spreading false narratives. That has contributed to this misinformation being spread. There was a point earlier saying that when one part of the body is hurt, injured, the whole body suffers and can feel the pain. But in case of Kashmiri Pandits, for the longest time possible, we are into the 31st year, nobody acknowledged that there was a hurt, there was a pain. If there is no hurt, there is no pain, how does the rest of the body know? I mean, we got to speak. I think very grateful for the platform Kona has given us, GKPD and all other, the social media where we are able to talk about our stories, awareness. But my request to every single person who has tuned in today, if you have really paid attention and heard our stories, can relate to it, can even feel a little bit of pain, go out and speak about it. I think we are beyond that time that we will listen to these stories and feel, oh my God, it's so bad, they went through that, and that is the end of it. No, when you go out to your families, you go out in your friend circle, you have a conversation, the word Kashmir comes up, bring awareness. Please help us, work with us in bringing awareness. Acknowledgement, awareness, and yes, we are victims of massive genocide. We need that acknowledgement. I'm not going to stop talking about it till justice is served for my grandfather.
Absolutely.
And everybody else who lost their lives to this senseless killing of Islamophobia, because based on religion. It is just I think I'll stop here and let others talk and I'll come back, but it should be unacceptable. It's inhuman. Nobody should be accepting that. Nobody should be asking somebody who lost their own and they know they lost it to this senseless killing, and they're asked, can you give us proof? Just because there was no social media, there were no cameras in action, there was no, we don't have it captured on camera. All that I have of my grandfather, the proof I have, that also we got in from some of this media, him on the road, and he was there for two hours. Nobody was allowed to come and help him. But in today's time, just because you can pull out your camera and click, just because somebody said something in a loud voice, and then, or we shut down the internet, and that is like, being inhuman and atrocities. We are living proof. We are not going to stop till the world knows about us and they acknowledge, yes, it did happen. We
Absolutely.
have to fight for every single person that lost their life to the senseless killing.
No, I fully agree with you, and really appreciate that sentiment of yours, and the courage. I think it requires a lot to speak about this, and every time deep wounds resurface. But I want to talk about the false narratives for a second. Ashish ji, as we had mentioned earlier, there are certain false narratives. This whole 200 number, but there's also other false narratives, right? I want to give a couple of examples. So one thing that I see is like, Kashmiri Pandits, they were upper caste. They're taking all the jobs away, and they kind of deserve this. They were responsible for their situation because they took all the jobs away. They created a lot of frustration amongst the local community, things like that. And then you also have groups out there who claim to be Kashmiris, just completely ignoring the narratives of the Kashmiri Pandits. So what are your thoughts on that?
Of course, I mean, like I said, narratives are always about, selectively taking parts of the whole truth, and sometimes it's based on the truth, and sometimes you can even distort it and present a story. Narratives are just that; they're stories, and so it depends on what kind of agenda a particular narrative serves. Now, this whole business of Kashmiri Pandits being, usurping all jobs and uh, and rendering the rest of the population unemployed or whatever. All one has to do is take the document from the late 80s of any government department and look at the ratio of the number of people who were employed, and then come to their own conclusion about who was in majority and who wasn't, and this whole narrative would be busted. But you see, there are bigger challenges than these stupid excuses that are given on behalf of the terrorists. And those bigger narratives are about Kashmiri Pandits being co-conspirators in their own exodus, in their own killings. And some people say that we actually conspired with the Indian state because we wanted to leave the valley so that the Indian state would have a free run and go around killing Muslims. Now, I mean, the ridiculousness of this whole narrative is just for everyone to see. But it is said quite openly, and in some circles, even among academic circles, uh, this narrative has a free run. So, when you have a distortion of truth at this level, then all these smaller things they just don't matter, because here you're basically making the claim that 500,000 people left literally overnight, mm, everything behind, left everything behind, left their native place of 5,000 years, and all that comes with it, and lived in camps and miserable conditions, so that some people so that the government would kill some Muslims. I mean, that's how sad the reality is. But it basically boils down to the fact that, who controls the narrative, who has access to the amplification channels, and whose stories are heard. And unfortunately, Hindus are not those people.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you on that. And every time we try to talk about this, not just in Kona, but across the board, there's always a kind of a disacknowledgement, whatever you want to call it, and a dismissal of these narratives. So I fully agree with you on that. Surinderji, we had talked about, there was one experience I remember when we met in Houston. You had mentioned that when you were practicing medicine, right, when you were in Srinagar Medical College, there was a blood-ridden body that was brought to your hospital, and I want to understand what went through your head when that actually happened.
Yeah, let me explain that. That's pretty emotional, and I know after 30 years, Swapnaji is in front of us. I had to tell her that was her grandfather whose body I received. So it was that I was a house job. I was doing a house. We have after you do your MBBS, you have 1 year of internship, and then you have 1 year of doing house job. And I was a house job. It's a junior most staff in the unit. I was doing house job in surgery, and I was the lone physician who was managing the casualty. Wherein that's the first degree contact of all the patients. It's an emergency basically. So when I'm there, I see that 4 or 5 people bring a body, and they are running, and there's a chaos, and they drop the body on the floor of this casualty, and they run away. And when I'm seeing that something is happening, I just get up. And I see a body that they have dropped, and I see this body. I see that I examined him there on the floor. I saw that he didn't have any pulse. He didn't have any breathing. I took this body on my arms and put it on the stretcher, at least to see what's going on. So I know it's going to be very painful for Sapnaji because. Anyhow, so
and I apologize, by the way. I didn't know that. So my sincere apologies, Swapnaji. That's
No, it's okay.
I will tell you something important after I finish explaining all these things. So when I keep it in the stretcher, I open his shirt and I see that he has a sacral thread, the Jammu. And when I open, there are blood oozing. I open his shirt and I remember 3 bullets. Tuck, tuck, tuck. It fell on the floor. And I see that I didn't know who he was. And I saw this is a Kashmiri Hindu. And then all of a sudden, the police came and so many people came. And there was a chaos. And now it took me, I knew that, I know Sapnaji for the last 30 years or so, more than that. I didn't tell her that it was your grandfather that I had received. This thing happened. And they didn't know what had happened. It took me 30 years. And last year, I told her when she spoke in one of the gatherings about her grandfather, I told her, by the way, do you know what happened to him at that time? They didn't know. And then I had to tell her. And then her father and cousins, everybody contacted, tell us what happened. This piece was missing. And after 30 years, this piece came together. And this was the story.
Unbelievable.
And what other proof do they want?
Yeah.
That is, yeah.
Exactly.
No,
When you deny,
this is the story of painful story all across the community.
Yeah.
It's just one isolated because Sapnaji is here.
Yeah.
But it is throughout. Every family has a story. And equally very painful, equally very shocking. And just to correct you, as Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, along with all other community organizations, we have collected 1,400 plus names who have been brutally killed. It is peer reviewed, peer validated. So this number game that you were 200, it took us several decades also to get to know what happened with us. It was not so easy. We got scattered. We were all challenges. We came on the road. We had to see how to stand up. We had to struggle for our survival. And in all that thing, it's after several decades, we are establishing a networking to know the actual magnitude of the problem. And still a lot of information is coming. Our biggest challenge, and it's not only Brahmins. We are missing one important part. Refugees from West Pakistan, hundreds of thousands have been languishing in Jammu. For 70 years, they had no rights. They didn't have right to vote. They didn't have right to apply for jobs. Not only that, Valmiki community, hundreds of thousands of people, they were promised, these are the Dalits, who were brought in with the promise that they will be given the permanent residency of the state. They have been there for the last 70 years. So it's not Brahmin, it's all, and I wonder that how they were forging an alliance with the Dalit communities, people, to exploit this whole situation when the huge Dalit community and people who are from very low strata, their human rights have been also trampled. But this awareness has to come out, and this narrative needs to be thought at multiple levels. Back to you.
No, absolutely. Again, the idea behind the story is that it shows the pain that we have been suffering as a community and stuff like that. When I say we, I'm talking about the Hindu community. For me, Kashmiris are no different than Gujaratis or any other place that in India or around the world. We are all together in this, and that's why it's very important to share these things, because if this happens there, it can happen anywhere, as you mentioned. Ashishji, you had
just one second. There's one more narrative. There is a purpose to divide Hindu into Brahmins, divide them into Thakurs, divide them into this, create these sects, and this has been going very, very bad. Yeah. And this is one of the narratives that's coming out.
Yep.
And this we need to collectively thought. We are one.
And not only that, if I may, Nikunji, it's also that not only were Kashmiri Pandits scattered all over, we were not willing to talk. So that goes back to what Rajatji was saying earlier when he was talking about transgenerational trauma. We were silent about it. And the more we, evolve and learn, we now know that silence is also, is a sign of trauma. That's why we didn't talk about it. And unfortunate is like some of us, a very handful, even Kashmiri Pandits, they use their name and as a birthright to talk against Kashmiri Pandits. So all the more reason, going back to what I said earlier, the more we have to talk about it, we have to spread create awareness and spread the word and make the world aware of what actually happened. No more are we going to be silent, even if it's going to be painful or not. And what was the police doing there that Surendraji mentioned when my grandfather was wanted? They were just spectators. Probably, I'm going to sound blunt and rude. Probably they were there to make sure that my grandfather had passed away. And no medical attention was given to him. Because to this date, as far as I know, there is no police report. No FIR was lodged. There is not a single postmortem report of what actually happened. What was the cause of death? Was it the bullet? Was it because he fell on the road and he hurt his head? So what was the police doing there? It's mind-boggling.
Yeah. Ashishji, have you visited Kashmir after Article 370 abrogation? If so, how often do you go there? Have you had any connections there?
No, I haven't visited ever since we left, and I don't want to visit. Because, to be very honest, Kashmir is no different than Pakistan to me, regardless of its legal accession to India and the abrogation of Article 370. And the day the article the articles were removed, I celebrated. There was a party in our office, but that celebration was on behalf of, or was from my identity as an Indian, not as a Kashmiri Hindu. And I suppose I slightly disagree with the other two panelists here in terms of how they view the abrogation of Article 370. And
Can you speak up a little bit louder? Just a little louder.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I suppose I disagree a little with the other panelists as far as the removal of Article 370 is concerned. Because for Kashmiri Hindus, it does not make any difference in terms of our return and rehabilitation in the valley. Because while the removal of Articles 35A and 370 is a great step for the Indian state to take control of the territory, civilizationally speaking, it makes little difference unless there are some steps taken in the future, of which I don't see any visible signs. And by signs, I mean in terms of how the Indian state carries itself while talking about Kashmir. Because if the Indian government were really serious about laying claim of Kashmir in a civilizational sense, then the stories about it, then the way in which Kashmir is addressed in international forums, in which how the Kashmiri Hindus figure in the scheme of things, that has to change. The stories have to come out. What you are doing, this has to happen at a government level, where people are actually, the government becomes serious about addressing our problem, because we are the primary victims. I'm not denying the trauma that other communities have gone through, but given the size and the connection that we have with the valley, I think we are the primary victims of terrorism in Kashmir. And the Indian government has so far not even talked about it. And there was this recent notification that came out in terms of the domicile status. They had to actually come out with two separate notifications, and it was almost an afterthought to include Kashmiri Hindus in the in how we need to apply for domicile. So now we are being told that we need to apply for domicile. We need that piece of paper to justify or to prove that we are actually, we have a stake in the valley. So the situation is pretty bad, and I'm not here to make hollow criticism of any government or the current government. What I'm trying to say is that things for us have not changed, and it would be a little foolish on our part to indulge in unnecessary optimism at this point.
So, yeah, Swapna, go ahead.
So Ashishji, I kind of agree with you. I kind of said the same thing, but in a different, maybe the words used were different. The positive thing I saw was the Kashmiri Hindus feeling a little confident and talking about it more. And I did mention that what actually transpires, some solid steps in future that will determine how this plays out in the bigger picture for Kashmiri Pandits. So the only immediate positive reaction to this, or what helped us, is it got us up and rejuvenated the energy in all of us. We have started talking about it. But absolutely, you're right. We haven't seen those solid steps being taken, which will prove that Kashmiri Pandits are in the front. In the front when a discussion around Kashmir is going on. It's not one of them in the back and then an afterthought, like you mentioned. So kind of on the same page there with you.
So Surinder, your thoughts on that?
See, there has been lots of wrongs for last 70 years. Now it will take time. It has lots of international. You see that CAA, how this whole thing was engineered, and how difficult it becomes to implement things, because the wrongs of last 70 years is still there. The bureaucracy is there, the judiciary is there. There are some at grassroots levels which needs to change. I think the current government has taken a bold step in the right direction. And we are confident. It's true that for us, there is nothing much that has changed on the ground. But we have to make those changes happen. And we have to be strategic. We have to speak about it. And we have to ensure that those in the powers of corridors hear us and start implementing things which favors us, rightfully so. So which creates an environment where because our biggest threat right now is extinction. We have it's very important for a root to be there, to be connected with the language, with your civilization. Now, once we don't have roots for last several years, our kids are not able to connect to that. And with the result, this small community, which is scattered all over the globe, is at the verge of extinction. Maybe after 20, 30, 40 years, nothing. And that government needs to understand. And that Muslims need to understand, because if this thing is happening, this will be the biggest shame for them. And that is how we need to create that environment. We have to work steadily. The government is sympathetic. We need to work with them and see how best they could deliver on what we want. So that is an ongoing process.
Got it. Okay. So, lots of things we can always continue discussing more and more. I want to give everybody 1 minute to kind of just give any last minute thought. I'll start with Ashish ji. Any last minute thoughts? How do we reconcile in the forward? What is the path forward? Any thoughts on your end?
Well, like I said, I think as far as the government is concerned, I think the Kashmir problem is basically the problem of the Indian state to solve. And no independent groups, no amount of advocacy, no amount of dharnas, anything of that sort by lay citizens is going to help. It has to be the Indian state that has to take charge, and it has to begin with. I'm not saying that let it take 50 years, let it take even 100 years, but the change that I would like to see on an immediate basis is a change in narrative as far as the Indian state is concerned. If you're not telling the right stories, if you're not owning up the issue in the right way, if you're not talking about Kashmiri Hindus first of all, then you are not taking it up civilizationally. You are only protecting your territory. And that, I've spoken about this before also. Territorial nationalism is not the way forward for India. Unless India becomes a civilizational nation state and recognizes the duty of the Indian state to serve the cause of the Indian civilization, problems like Kashmir are not going to go away. And the sure shot sign of that change would be a change in the narrative and a change in the tone and tenor of the conversations or the statements that are made by the government representatives.
Excellent. Surendraji, your thoughts?
I think we need to continue. We didn't realize, maybe we could not have envisioned that Article 370 and 35A will be abrogated in a single stroke. Never. And we are fortunate that this thing has happened in our lifetime. Now, things happen. We don't know down the road after 5 years what's going to happen. We will always make efforts. We will be continuing with our perseverance and things and alliances. One day things will change. That will be our hope. Our hope is that Government of India understands what are the things at stake for us and seriously try to do certain things for our benefit to reclaim our land and our civilization.
Thank you. And Swapnaji, final thoughts from you.
Sure. I think it is, like they say, work in progress. We of foot soldiers can be talking and putting in whatever effort in any form and shape that we can. But agree with Ashish ji and Surinder ji, unless and until government of India openly supports and speaks up and has a game plan, and it's kind of communicated to the community as well, to assure us that we are we are not going to be extinct, and we have an important role to play. Is very important. The reason I bring this up, post abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, you're probably aware there were a lot of teaching sessions in all reputed colleges and universities in the US. And in this corner where I live, however, like they say in school, you bunk classes and you show up where you want to be. So I somehow managed to be at all of these. And there was so much false narrative and wrong, misinformation being spread there, that we were so disheartened that we requested and went to the embassy of India and talked to them and said, guys, we need to know. You guys got to support us. You got to counter this false narrative. And they openly are like, हाँ जी, हम लोग कर रहे हैं, आपको नहीं पता है इनके पास कितना पैसा है, it's all petrodollars, Gulf से आ रहे. And we walked out of there kind of it was not a very encouraging thing. I mean, you could put it different way. They also need to put some energy and extra effort in there. And
Absolutely.
It's not going to change overnight. It's going to be something that happened for decades. It's not going to change in our favor or overnight. We have to be patient at the same time, and we cannot stop doing what we are doing. We got to keep talking about it and hoping all positive results start showing up.
Yep, absolutely. And we will continue to provide the forum. There's a lot to do, many, many stories to be told, documented, written about, discussed in academic settings. As you said, rightly so, Swapnaji, that we have seen these teach-ins happening over the last year, and there is no discussion whatsoever. And I've been to some of them also. It's as if the Kashmiri Pandits don't exist. Kashmiri Hindus never existed in the valley. It was never about the Kashmiri Pandits getting kicked out. It's all about another community being disenfranchised and discriminated against, and the Indian state comes in and really becomes brutalized, brutalizing them. That's the story that you see in all these teachings, and it's very, very disturbing indeed.
And actually, Kashmiri Pandits do exist in quite a few of those, because they are showing an Englishman with a whip, and they're people working in the fields, and they're saying, hey, see, that's a Kashmiri Pandit. That's what they did to the Muslims. Yeah. So us committing all those grave atrocities, that's the only time when Kashmiri Pandits exist. Otherwise, we are nowhere on the face of the earth.
Yes, and that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's actually a point that happens across for all Hindus. When the only time Hindus are shown are these mob ravaging Hindus who are out to kill minorities. That's the narrative that we see. And it's very unfortunate, because that's, I'm not saying that may be a small portion of people out there, but that's in every community, right? You have people who are violent or extremists in certain communities and stuff like that, but that's not the overall. When we talk about the world is talking about anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, so many things, but the moment you bring out Hindu phobia and what happened to Kashmiri Pandits, what happened to Hindus in general, you're shut down. You're basically said, hey, you guys are being Islamophobic, or you guys are being too overly, you're exaggerating the whole thing. And I think that's what we have to continuously challenge, because even as the earlier panelist said, the global Jewish community went through a similar situation. They are called all kinds of names. They were called like, oh, you were responsible for your own genocide, things like that. And they stood up. So I'm very happy that we had this opportunity to have this discussion. Now it's available out there. Very important for us to continue this conversation. And I'm very thankful for all of you for joining us today. Tomorrow we'll have additional discussions as far as Article 370 with two experts talking about technicalities, the misconceptions and stuff. And we'll also hear from a new generation that is born and brought up in the US, how they feel being part of that generation whose parents and grandparents went through this genocide and persecution. So again, I want to thank all of you. Just hold on. I'll end the broadcast now. To all the viewers, I really want to thank you for joining us. Tomorrow at 12 noon Eastern, we're going to continue the day 2 of the conference. So please make sure you tune in. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you.
Yeah.